Okay, next thing I want to address as far as chemistry is concerned is ions and electrolytes, which is learning outcome A3 in your learning guide. All right, so ions. Let's define ions. Ions are charged particles. These charged particles could be charged atoms, meaning that they've either lost electrons or gained electrons. They are no longer neutral. I'll go over that in a minute. Or they could be molecules that are charged. So you can have molecules which are multiple atoms joined together, multiple atoms of different molecules that are joined together, as well as the same atoms joined together, that either have a positive or negative charge. Those are ions. Electrolytes are defined as substances that ionize in water. And in addition to the fact that they can ionize in water, that these substances, once they're ionized, are capable of conducting electricity or conducting charge. Okay, so let's go over these in a little more depth here. All right, so ions is a charged particle, typically a charged atom, can be a charged molecule. And so when we talk about ions, we can have, let's take for example, sodium. If we look at sodium here, atomic number 11, a neutral sodium atom would have 11 protons and 11 electrons. And it's neutral because if we take 11 positively charged, that gives us a total charge of positive 11. 11 negatively charged is a total of negative 11. And we add those charges, they cancel out, we end up getting a neutral charge. Now, let's take a look at these orbitals. We know that we can have 2 electrons in the first orbital, 8 in the second. We add those up, that's 10 electrons. Well, the 11th electron in sodium is going to have to go in that third orbital. Now, we know that the orbitals beyond 2 can hold 8 electrons. Well, those valence shells always want to be full. Those atoms want those valence shell to always be full. Now, would it be easier for the sodium atom to get 7 more electrons or get rid of the one that it has? If you said get rid of the one that it has, you're correct, and that's exactly what sodium will do. It will donate its electrons, that electron in that third orbital, to another atom that needs an electron to fill up its outer shell. For example, let's look at chlorine. Chlorine, atomic number 17. A neutral chlorine atom has 17 protons, 17 electrons. Don't worry about the number of neutrons. Those can vary. And so we get an overall charge of 0. But if we look at the number of electrons and the way they're distributed in these valence shells, we're going to see 2 in the first, 8 in the second, and 7 in the third. Well, again, we want 8 electrons in that valence shell. Is it going to be easier for the chlorine to get rid of those 7 or to pick up an additional one to have a full shell? If you said it was easier for it to pick up an 8th electron, you would be correct. And so it will receive then an electron from an atom that's capable of giving one away. Now, what happens is that when sodium donates its electron to chlorine, it creates a molecule or a compound called sodium chloride. And one instance of that particular compound is called a molecule. Okay, so a compound is when you combine 2 or more different atoms together to get a compound, but one instance of that. If I had 1 sodium and 1 chloride bonded together in my hand, that would be 1 molecule of sodium chloride. So we can say that sodium then has a positive 1 charge because it is going to want to give away that electron. And when we get rid of that electron, we now have 11 protons, 10 electrons, and if we do our little arithmetic for our charges here, what's the overall charge? A positive 1. Same with chlorine here. We know that chlorine can actually receive an electron. If it does, it has 17 protons, 18 electrons. If we total those up, we get an overall charge of -1, and so we're going to say that chlorine has a -1 charge. Now, we don't deal a whole lot with this stuff in what we're going to talk about in A and P, but when you get to chemistry, this is stuff you will have to understand. Now, how do ions relate to electrolytes? Well, when we take salts such as sodium chloride, disodium phosphate, magnesium chloride, etc., everything listed here, these salts will break up into their respective ions. A positively charged ion is called a cation. Negatively charged ion is an anion. And these salts will break up in water and kind of get dissolved and distributed within that water as calcium ions and chloride ions, or sodium ions and phosphate ions, which have a -2 charge, magnesium ions, and chloride ions, etc. So you can see that these compounds have broken apart, they've dissociated into their respective ions, and now these ions, because they're charged, they are capable of conducting charge or conducting current or electricity, hence the term electrolytes. Typically we use the term electrolytes just to refer to the ions that are produced when these salts ionize in water. So you can look at these term electrolytes two different ways, as the salts that ionize or the ions that you get following that ionization process. Now, electrolytes are pretty important. I want to address that briefly here. Electrolytes are important because, number one, they have reactive effects. They play important roles in chemical reactions. They have electrical effects. Meaning that they are important for maintaining what we call membrane voltage. What that means is that every cell in the body has a difference of ions in the cell and outside of the cell. And that's very important to maintaining what we call a membrane voltage so that the cells can function properly. And that's something we get into more depth in Biology 106. And they also have what we call osmotic effects. And these osmotic effects relate to the distribution of water in the body and how that water can actually move from compartment to compartment and place to place within the body. And a lot of that has to do with the concentration of these electrolytes, these ions in various parts of the body.